Hi, Harriet. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I suppose this is your sort of welcome to the My Pet Nutritionist team. So you are our on-site physio, aren't you?
I am, and this is my very glamorous assistant Baxter.
I know, and it was so funny because when we just logged on, I was like, "Hi, Baxter," and I was like, "I'm so sorry," but I just went straight to the dog.
That's true, though, isn't it? You kind of like humans don't really matter when there's a dog around. That's the most
No,
important thing, isn't it?
absolutely. I'll remember dog names, cat names, but I couldn't tell you the owner's name.
That is so true. I don't think we're alone in that.
So, I mean, with this being your sort of arrival to the team, do you want to tell us a bit about you and what you do? So, as I suppose, we know about physios, and especially in the human realms, and I suppose canine physios have been quite a new addition, and perhaps people don't really know what you'd get involved for or what you do. So, do you want to sort of tell us about you?
Absolutely. Well, let's say it's because, like many people who end up working with dogs or animals, we're quite often motivated by our own dogs, aren't we? And that's kind of how I ended up doing what I do now. So, back in the day, I did IT marketing for 20 odd years. And then before we had Baxter, we had a lovely boy called Jensen, and he was another golden retriever. And we had him from a puppy, and he had many different issues.
Oh.
And he was basically the reason that I really jacked in my career of 20 odd years and totally trained. Originally, I trained in massage, and I'll be honest, when I first did it, I was literally just doing it to help Jensen. I saw the difference it made, and how much it helped him. And as part of my training, I had to do case studies and treat other dogs, and I just fell in love with it.
Did you? Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, what else can I do? What else can I do to help? So I ended up continuing my studies.
Yeah.
Led me into doing physiotherapy, and because I kind of thought I want to, I use my hands a lot. I mean, my default with most dogs is to kind of use my hands, but what else I could do to help. So physio was a very natural next step. And then thanks to Baxter, I got to know you, Lisa, and this is how I've ended up also learning a little bit about nutrition. So which I'm also absolutely loving, and Baxter is feeling the benefit of that. So that's kind of how I kind of ended up doing what I do, really. So I should say, my name's Harriet Kitcat. I don't think I actually said what my name is. To say we're too busy talking about Baxter, aren't we?
Baxter, so we'll just know you as Baxter's owner.
And his human. So I am Harriet Kitcat. I have got a very funny surname, and no, I don't get any free chocolate because everyone always asks me that.
Really?
No free chocolate. But it is spelt slightly differently. It's spelt Kitcat. So
it is, isn't it? To be honest, I've never even noticed that. But yeah, you're right. It is a slightly different spelling, isn't it? So that's why you don't get free chocolate.
That's how I don't get free chocolate. And we were around a lot before the chocolate bar, so that's our little.
Do you like Kit Kats?
I do. It's actually, they are one of my favourite.
That's all right then.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, totally off topic. I remember as a kid going into like a sweet shop. I was probably about 4 or 5, and I thought, oh my god, there's a chocolate bar called Kit Kat, but they've spelt it wrong.
Oh, how naive as a child. How innocent. So as a physio, what sort of, because I suppose, do you still do massage as sort of a physio role? What does it look like?
So the reason I wanted to learn a little bit more about what else I could do is because not all dogs like to be touched ultimately. Not do, I mean, as you can see, Baxter very, very happily does. And that physio kind of comes under, if you like, sort of 3 buckets. So it's kind of like an umbrella term. And you've got manual therapies, so physio, so massage obviously plays a big part of that. But there's also other techniques that we can use with our hands, like mobilization sort of stretches and lots of different other things that we can do with the joints and the muscles, the tissues, etc. So manual therapy can play a really big part. You've also got things like sort of therapeutic exercises. So again, depending on the dog, and I know we're going to talk about senior dogs in a second, but depending on the dog, it might be more of that sort of yoga Pilates type approach.
Okay.
Or it might be a little bit more, sort of circuit training type approach. Again, depending on what you're kind of trying to achieve with your dog.
Okay.
But therapeutic exercises it can be massive. There's so many varieties there.
So the yoga and sort of Pilates, should we say, for dogs, what would you be targeting with like yoga and Pilates style?
So it could be, the plank. If you do, anyone that knows yoga,
yeah,
the plank, that is obviously working on our core. So
yeah,
we can get dogs to maybe put front legs on one platform and their back legs on another platform, and it doesn't have to be very high, and they're actually standing on planks, and in that position we could be maybe doing some weight shifting. We can do again some stretches there, again depending on what we're trying to achieve. And with a lot of these types of things, we've got our stabilizing muscles, so that's what keeps us upright. And then we've got our moving muscles, so again that's what moves us. And I think what can be forgotten a lot of the time is that when we're doing physio, we want to be targeting both sets of muscles, but again depending on what we're trying to achieve. Like the senior dog I saw this morning, for instance, he can't stand for much longer than about a minute. Him standing is actually quite difficult, but he can walk, but because walking is quicker. Actually standing, what you need your stabilizing muscles for, can be quite tricky. So again, so there's a whole load of different sort of therapeutic exercises that we can do, again depending on what we're trying to achieve. And then you've got devices, so you can have, some people might have heard of laser. There's lots of different types of sort of light therapies we can use. There's pulse mag, which is sort of electrical pulse going through magnets. That's being used a lot of time on humans. So there's lots. There's a whole variety. There's a list as long as you are. But there's also good old-fashioned hot water bottle and an ice pack. So there's a whole range of different things that we can use. And again, it just comes under that umbrella of physio, as to which, you might use all of those, or you might just use a few of those, depending on what you're trying to achieve.
So do you tend to get referrals from sort of practitioners like vets, or will you work directly with owners? How does it usually work?
It is, again, a real variety. So some vets will refer. They may have operated on a dog, so maybe cruciate ligament was quite a common operation for dogs. So cruciate is in their knee, and that if that has to be operated on, then they might think actually, maybe some rehab would help. But the benefits of sort of physio for dogs, or not just dogs, any animals, is very, very similar to how we would benefit. So really, those referrals can kind of come from anywhere. Like I say, sometimes vets, quite often owners have just Googled it themselves, and they're like, okay, help my dog in recovery. And then, I call myself physio my dog, and one of the reasons was because I thought, well, actually, when people are searching, they're going to be searching physio for my dog. So I just thought, there you go, I'll call myself. So as I say, so a lot of time it's from vets, or vet referral centres. Owners, a big part comes from owners. Other therapists, so there might be, the dog might be having, say, hydrotherapy. And so they'll actually be saying, well, actually, maybe you can, I think some physio exercises maybe would be beneficial as well. So it just very much depends on any avenues, sometimes. And other times it's just people their dogs had it, they then talk to another person, they go, oh, you should try physio, especially as our dogs are getting older, which I know we're going to be talking about. But it just a real range of places.
So you touched briefly on dogs that are potentially recovering from an op, but I guess when the umbrella of everything that you can do is so big, what are the sorts of things that dogs come to you with, or is that list just?
It's like that long. I mean, you know, I know we're going to talk about sort of senior dogs, so maybe that's a good place to kind of try and narrow it down. So again, senior dogs can have lots of different conditions. So sometimes it's, you know, wear and tear, it's arthritis. You know, I guess that's probably the biggest kind of condition a lot of the time that I see, and that may have been, let's say, wear and tear type arthritis. You know, they've gone old, they've had, again, depending on what kind of life they've had, that might be a reason. Or they may have had an operation, you know, back in the past, and that arthritis is, you know, starting to catch up with them. But quite often there's lots of different reasons. There might be neurological stuff going on, and then they've had arthritis on top, like the dog I saw this morning. So two dogs this morning. Actually, they were both senior dogs, and, you know, one had a spinal trauma about 3 or 4 years ago, and that's affecting his legs. Now, there's actually nothing really wrong with his legs. It's just that because of his spinal trauma, not everything's in his back. So now he's losing slightly strength from his back leg. So, you know, we're trying to work that whole body to keep him as functional as possible. And I think that's kind of the really important thing to remember with our senior dogs, is that we want, and again, from a physio perspective, we're looking at function. So how can we, you know, when I go in to see a dog, I'm like, how are they functioning? So if they're lying down, how easily can they, you know, if they're lying on their side like Baxter, how easily can they get up? How easily can they get into stand? How easily can they get into the back garden? How can they eat? How often are they exercising? All those types of things. You know, how are they functioning? And where there's a gap, you know, where they're struggling, then that's how we can start to prioritise as to how we want to kind of help them.
So potentially then, even if we've got senior dogs that haven't necessarily got sort of an obvious condition, could you say that actually physio could be used to just improve that quality of life, and just, it's that, as you say, it's those functions and just prolonging that quality as long as possible?
Completely. I mean, it's exactly the same for us. You know, I mean, if I think of how old Baxter is, so you know, we don't know exactly how old he is. He's probably between 9 and 10. And let's see, I know I want him
flat out.
I don't want him to age. I want him to stay like this. So, you know, in human years, and I think sometimes it's easier to kind of think about, again, you know, there's different ways we can think about how old our dogs are. There's, you know, some people used to say, oh yeah, you know, it's 1 year for human and 7 dog years, what have you, which, you know, is a kind of way of doing it. Or there's quite a good infographic that some of the different sort of organisations use, and it's kind of, you know, the size of the dog. So you know, the smaller the dog, you know, they tend to last a little bit longer than some of the big dogs. So for Baxter, you know, he's probably like mid to late 60s. And so I think sometimes that can help us kind of put things into perspective a little bit. So
absolutely,
you know, in the mid 60s, you're not going to be able to physically do all the things that you can do, you know, maybe when you were 15.
30.
You know, it's you know, so we have to remember that. And I think that's harder for us sometimes as owners to kind of recognise, because as I say, we don't want them to get old. You know, if they could do, you know, 2, 3, 4 hour walks when they were younger, they're not going to be able to do that when they're older. Or if they can, they're going to be struggling. It's going to take them much longer to recover.
And as you say, it's I think, as you say, because we are there for their whole life, we don't see them aging, do it just suddenly becomes a day, and as you say, whether a bit stiff, they're getting up after their walk, or, you know, it just takes them that bit longer to get out of bed. And I suppose we just don't want it to happen, so we almost act as though it's never going to.
No, I know, and it's hard, and it really is difficult. And I think, you know, again, sometimes when I go into people's houses and I'll make some suggestions, they're like, I didn't think about that. And you know, as I say, from a physio perspective, as I say, there's lots of things that I can do as a therapist, and I can also sort of empower. And I'm all about empowering the owner, because ultimately, you know, I'm there an hour, what have you, but most of the time the dog's with the owner. So how much they can do, what they can do on a day-to-day basis, can make such a big difference. So
I mean, that probably leads us quite nicely in. I know you were sort of going to go through what a physio session looks like for the senior dog, but I suppose we could reverse it potentially. So if you're going in to see a senior dog, what are the sorts of things that you might suggest from a physio point of view? So not necessarily with the session, that would be very important, but as a generic sort of, if owners were watching, what could they take away?
Yeah, I mean, I always say to people, look, because I'm aging as well, so I always actually,
aren't we all?
I always write everything down for owners afterwards. I send them like a report and everything afterwards, so they can read it afterwards. Because I think sometimes when you first go in, it's like, oh my god, I've got to do all these things, and we can kind of forget.
And you don't take it. Yeah, you don't take it in. And as well, I suppose it's that realization, and equally because we don't want these senior dogs to get older, it's a bit of denial potentially as well.
Exactly. So. But to answer your question, so how it would normally look is I'd go in, I always ask them to sort of complete a questionnaire before I get there. So I've got a bit of an idea about, day in the life of, say, Baxter. And then we'll go through some, like that, because I always go to people's houses on the mobile therapist.
Yeah.
I do some things online, but a lot of, I'll go kind of mainly to people's houses, which means that I can see the setup at home. So I can see, where do they sleep? What kind of flooring have they got? Where's their dog bowl? What kind of access have they got into the garden? So where do they sleep? As in a bed, on the owner's bed, sofa, that type of thing. So really start to say, always thinking about that function aspect. And, if they are getting on the sofa, how easy is that? How high is their sofa? Is it this high? Is it this high?
Yeah.
And again, remembering, dogs are, they're designed to have 4 legs on the ground. If they're coming down, they're putting 4 times their body weight through their front end. Yeah. So we want to be thinking, okay, are they jumping down off a high sofa? Are they running down the stairs? All those types of things.
It's interesting that you say that, actually, because George, my German Shepherd, he's 10, and I always know when he's due his acupuncture because he stops going on the sofa, and it's because as he's jumping down, and he's got arthritis in his elbows and his wrists, and it's that pressure. But then as soon as he's had his acupuncture, he's back up on the sofa because it's not quite as sore when he jumps down. So little things like that you perhaps wouldn't think about, but as you say, they're really important, aren't they?
And it can make such a difference. And again, looking at the height of the sofa, so again, if he really likes the sofa, it's like, okay, so how can we make that process of him getting up and down easier? Is there like a stool, is there like a perf or something like that you can put down, not you necessarily, but people in general. And really importantly, the flooring. I mean, it just makes such a massive difference. And I go to people's beautiful houses and they've got these beautiful floors, and I'm like, yeah, you need to put rugs down. And it's like, you don't have to, and these things don't have to be really expensive. And I think that's the really important thing, is that pain management can come under such, again, can be an umbrella for so many different things. Pain management doesn't have to be medication, which I think some people kind of think it is. Pain relief can be putting a rug down, non-slip flooring down. So again, it doesn't have to be your whole house, but look to see where your dogs are naturally, where are their high traffic areas
and bases. Yeah,
exactly. And they gravitate to them, So again, there's always one dog that lies on the floor, I guess. You can make you can take the horse to water, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But really simple things like that. If the dog or their water bowl's on the floor, raising it. So again, keeping that sort of flat top line, because if they're having to nod their head and bend down, especially for maybe someone like George who's got arthritis, maybe elbows and carpus, which is like their wrists, for them to bend down, that's painful for them.
Yeah.
So things like that, again, can make such a massive difference. And, again, access to the car. How often are they going out in the car? Is it a really big boot that they have in the car? They're going to be rattling around, that type of thing. How can we make, getting in and out?
Ramps.
Ramps, or if they're little dogs, so obviously you can carry them.
Yeah.
But, again, some people, I quite often hear people say, oh, we bought a ramp and they won't use it. And it's, again, thinking about how we introduce the ramp, so we don't put it straight onto the car. Maybe it'll be in the garden, or it'll be in the house, or you feed them some treats of it, or you make it just something novel, and then you gradually introduce how you would then, you know, use that on a car. So it's not all of a sudden, oh my God, I've got to get in there.
What is this? Yeah, that condition.
So I would definitely look at so general sort of lifestyle stuff. I'll always get an idea of how what kind of exercise they're getting. So, you know, again, there's no magic. A lot of people will say, oh, how much should my dog be walked? And there's no magic amount of time. It depends on your dog. And especially with our senior dogs, I think the most important thing is that we just remember that they are potentially, you know, late 60s. So they can't necessarily do what they could do a few years ago, and being really kind of mindful of that. So I'll always give, you know, advice on what kind of exercise management they should be doing. And then I'll always do my full assessment. So again, I'd never restrain a dog. I'll always go very much at their pace. So, you know, a dog like Baxter is more than happy to, you know, to be touched.
No, I think he hates it.
I know, he doesn't look like he's having it. Actually very jealous. Sometimes I look at him and I'm like, I actually want to be you.
That relaxed and just
so relaxed.
He is not a care in the world.
So again, so I'll always do a full examination, especially the first one that I see the dog. So see, I can't diagnose, so vets are legally people that will diagnose, so therapists aren't allowed to do that, but we can say what we see and what we feel. So I'll always do like a gait analysis to see how the dog's moving, and then you see the wind blowing, can't you? And as I say, I'll do as much of a treatment as I can the first time round, again depending on the tolerance of the dog, because sometimes, you know, just being touched by someone random is a bit like, oh, what are you doing, you know, type thing. So I'll do as much as I can with my hands, and then I always give owners homework, which I do write down for them. So and the homework might be sort of stuff that they can do around the house, that type of thing, but also maybe start to introduce some sort of gentle stretches, or heat pads, or some gentle, really simple massage things that they can do, or as I say, doing some Pilates type yoga type thing. You know, again, just very much depending on what the capabilities of the owner and of the dogs.
And what is going on for the dog. So with My Pet Nutritionist, you're going to be offering online consultations, aren't you? Is that right?
That's I believe so.
So what would that sort of look like, and what sorts of, you know, what would it consist of really?
So, you know, because of COVID, we all had to change, didn't we? I never did online consults before COVID. I mean, there was never any kind of reason. And it ended up being quite a happy accident, really. And I've ended up helping loads of different dogs, especially dogs that, you know, with behaviour problems, because a lot of the time, you know, a lot of dogs don't like strangers coming into the house. And so
that's an interesting point.
All these poor owners were like, you know, my dog's had an operation, I need help, but COVID's happened, and secondly, I've got a reactive dog who won't, you know, just cannot tolerate strangers, and certainly strangers coming to the home. So, you know, I ended up learning quite a lot through the whole COVID process. So to answer your question, I do a very similar process with regards to, you know, getting a lot of information up front. I'll ask for, as I say, owners to complete a form and send video footage, so then I can see, as I say, how the dog is moving, because that can tell us an awful lot. And then we'll go through, say, day in the life of Baxter. And then again, a lot of the time, the first session is just covering so much of that stuff that we can do. We can start now. Doesn't have to, as I say, doesn't always mean it's going to be really, really expensive. And we can start to make sort of changes pretty much straight away. And again, depending on what we're trying to achieve, I'll try to empower the owner with as much as I can, that they could, obviously online I can't use my hands, I can obviously look to see how the dog is moving. The owners can, as I say, send videos and what have you, and they can start to monitor how the dog's responding. And then we can work out if there's certain exercises that make, again, very simple. It's not, as I say, we're not doing agility circuits or anything like that. They're always very gentle, because a lot of the time as humans, our reaction is to try and do everything, do it really quickly. If we're massaging, we want to massage like this. It's actually just touching your dog, just increasing circulation to an area can be really, really, really beneficial. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an expert in doing that. You can actually, you can actually bring a lot of benefit to your dog.
Oh, he's like, touch me.
Steve's actually got like a repetitive strain in his shoulder from where he's lying on the sofa and his back just wants him to.
No.
He now needs physio.
Bless him.
But I would also kind of sort of remind owners as well is that enrichment stuff can be so powerful for our dogs, and again, they might physically not be able to do several things, but actually they, if they're losing their sight or they're losing their hearing, they're going to become a lot more reliant on their other senses. So it's trying to kind of keep that cognitive function going as well, because just because they might have certain sort of restrictions in what they can physically do, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't still be enriched in their lives. And there's so many different things again that we can do with that, which can form part of physio. So one of the bits of homework I quite often do owners is literally have your dog standing correctly, so standing square, and just have a licking mat, at the right height, so they're then standing. So they're standing correctly, they're using their postural muscles to keep them upright, and they love it because they've got a licking mat which has probably got something nice and healthy on it.
or at least stinky and smelly, which they just want to eat.
Definitely. But yeah, no, there's so many things that we can do, not just for senior dogs, but there's so many things that we can do for our dogs on a day-to-day basis, which I can cover with some of the online work. And it's endless, really. As I say, there's you don't have the hands-on, but there's so many other things to say that we can achieve. And I've got quite a few online clients now, and as I say, it works really well.
And I suppose that's probably a misconception, isn't it? That we kind of think that something has got to be wrong with our dog to need a physio, when in reality, if we're just looking at potentially improving quality of life, then there's so many things that can be added as well. So the dog doesn't necessarily have to have something obviously wrong. It can just be, as you say, enrichment and supporting that quality of life as they get older.
Completely. And my little plea to everyone out there is, please always keep an eye on your dog's weight. Okay, so please don't let your dog get overweight, especially as they get older. It's so much harder for them. And them losing weight, that is pain in itself, because if you can get some of that foundation stuff there, so your flooring, and all that kind of stuff, and the right body weight, it just means that you're so much less reliant on other interventions. So, I hear people say, I don't want my dog to be on pain relief, as in medication. It's like, they might not have to be as reliant on it if we can do some of those other things, and it's a body condition. So I don't like to say body weight always, because people can sometimes get really fixated on a number. So if they have to get to 30 kilos, what have you, and it's not about that. It's about how how much can we feel their ribs? How much
waist?
How much beer belly have they got when you look from the side, and how much can we see from the top? And that is always a much better indication than as to what the scales are basically saying.
Yeah, and obesity, and it's huge, isn't it? It influences so many different conditions. So from a musculoskeletal point of view, it's that extra pressure and burden through the joints. But then from a nutrition point of view and metabolic health, it's just, as you say, it is a plea, isn't it, really, that to keep dogs and cats really at a decent weight, an ideal body score.
Absolutely. And you know, again, it's just remembering there are so many things, you know, some people might say, oh, the dog's just getting old, and it's like, but that doesn't mean that they have to miss out, and it doesn't mean that they can't still enjoy life. And you know, hopefully people will be kind of motivated that there's actually loads of things that maybe they just haven't necessarily thought of, but there are so many things that we can do to really improve quality of life with our dogs, you know. And it's lovely.
It's definitely a mind shift, you know, and I noticed that with George, and it was sort of because he's been so healthy for his whole life. It was only when little things started to appear, and then it was like, okay, now I really need to be proactive in supporting the rest of his life. And it is that mind shift, isn't it? It's acknowledging it and thinking, okay, well, we've still got somewhere to go. And I suppose the sooner that we accept that, the better position we're in, isn't it?
Definitely. It's harder for us. It's definitely, you know, when I say to some owners that, you know, when we talk about maybe the types of exercise, so it's not just about how long are they out of the house for, it's like, what are they doing when they're out of the house?
Yeah.
You know, so what kind of exercise type, length of time, that sort of thing. And a lot of the time it's harder for the owners because they're used to, you know, doing X, Y, Z with their dog, you know, for X amount of time, or, you know, going on long holidays, or hiking holidays, that type of thing. And then to know that, you know, one of my friends, she's a big hiker, and she got a collie, and she's amazing for her age, but you know, my friend says she can't cope with those length walks anymore, you know. And it's harder, that's been harder for her than it has been really for the dog. They're more than happy to be left at home.
Yeah. It's that culture that we get into as well, isn't it? You know, this culture that dogs need, you know, so many hours a day, or as you say, I think we are always the problem, aren't we?
They got it sorted. I tell you, they know, they teach us.
They do, if we listen.
We listen, exactly. Yeah, it's not about us, it's all about them, isn't it?
Well, thank you so much for chatting today. It's been really, really nice to hear what physios do and the types of things that you can help with. And Baxter has made his debut as well, but you will forever be known as Baxter's owner now.
Aware of that.
But thank you so much.
I'm hoping that, as I say, that gives you a little bit of an indication. You know, all physios are different. We all work slightly differently, but our end game is always the same. You know, it's basically just helping dogs move and feel better, which is what we all want, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
No worries. See you soon.
Bye.